Large gatherings require large serving bowls. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today I've got a large piece of hickory that we're going to turn. This blank is 15 inches in diameter or almost 38 centimeters, and it weighs a lot. Now this wood came down a year ago in a hurricane and it's still not dry. I've prepared this particular blank so that it could sit for this length of time without cracking dramatically. If you want to learn more about how to process green wood so that you too can have bowl blanks like this to turn on your lathe, check out my Tree to Bowl Understanding Green Wood online course. Over there we go over everything you need for processing raw wood. Now this piece has, like I said, has been sitting around for a year. It's not dry, it's not equalized, it's still holding moisture. And that's what's incredible about wood. It can hold moisture for a very long time, especially if it's a thick piece of wood. But that makes it actually really nice for turning. And this piece is mellowed out, so it's not really wet, but it's also not dry, so it's somewhere in between. I'm going to need to sharpen my tools a lot, and I'm going to pay attention to how this wood performs while I'm cutting to see what I want to do as far as the final drying and how I want to process this. But all in all, I've got a pretty good idea because I've done a lot of turning with this type of hickory in my area. And that's one thing I recommend that you do is get to know the different tree species in your area. Now keep in mind, you could have two trees that are the same species that behave differently. So it is just a rule of thumb that you're going to start seeing consistency in a particular species, but there can always be some variation on that, so keep that in mind. Now I'm going to be using my 6-inch heavy-duty faceplate to mount this to the lathe because I really want to make sure there's a good secure connection initially. That's going to give me free space at the bottom to freely turn that tenon and shoulder. I'm going to make the shoulder and the tenon a little bit deeper because I want the foot of this bowl to be a little bit deeper as well. I'm anticipating that this bowl is going to move a little bit as it dries, and after it's done its final movement, I will then be able to sand that base flat. What's going to happen is that base, when I take it off the lathe, is going to be perfectly flat, but it's going to curve over time. And this way, because I'm making that foot thicker, it'll give me the opportunity to basically take down the high spot so it will seat properly after it's had a chance to dry. So all that being said, let's get this great big chunk of hickory on the lathe and see what we get. Now this is a pretty heavy blank and I want to use a substantial faceplate. This is a 6-inch faceplate. It's made by One Way. I'll put a link to this and all the products I'm using in the description below this video. Now I'm going to go ahead and fasten all of the screws in this. I'm using my impact driver. This impact driver makes a world of difference. If you're just using a drill, going from a drill to an impact driver is amazing because there's no hesitation. It just drives those screws in. Now this is really important that you support the bowl blank and then turn the headstock hand wheel to attach this to the lathe. You do not want to lock the lathe down and turn the blank because you'll run the risk of stripping the threads on your headstock. Now I'm going to bring the tailstock up for additional support. It was interesting when I was getting this up to speed, there was wobble noticeable with the bowl blank not supported with the tailstock, but as soon as I brought the tailstock in, it had had some stability, so I was able to actually increase the speed of the lathe just a bit because of that extra support from the tailstock. So I'm using my 5/8 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge here, and I want to take down this corner. You know, when I first started turning bowls, I would want to do the end and do the face of the bowl and get those nice and smooth and flat. But what you realize is that if you work this corner down, you're actually achieving both of those at the same time, and it's much more efficient and quicker to do it this way. So I'm taking that corner down and establishing the initial shape. The thing with taking the corner down is you don't realize is that very quickly you're reaching pretty far over that tool rest. You can see the gap between the tool rest and the bowl here is increasing. So I'm going to need to stop here in a moment and move up the tool rest. Now The reason I'm not stopping a lot is that because of the weight of this bowl, it takes about 20 seconds for this blank to stop. So it's a little bit frustrating and inefficient, but it needs to be done to make sure that we move this tailstock up. Here I'm using the hand wheel to slow down the blank so that I can get to that tailstock a little quicker. But you really want that the tool rest up closer so that you have good support of your bowl gouge like you're seeing here. Now this wood is holding moisture, but it's not soaking wet. So the shavings and the curly shavings are coming off quite nicely. It's turning well. It's not hard as a rock yet. If I were to wait a few more years, this thing would be like turning a brick. It would not be easy. This wood, hickory, is a very hard wood, and I will need to be sharpening my tool frequently during this turning. Here you can see the 5/8 inch bowl gouge pointing in the direction of the cut. I like using the 5/8 inch bowl gouge to rough out blanks. The 5/8 inch bowl gouge will remove more material than the 1/2 inch bowl gouge, but that being said, it's not as if it's removing 5/8 inch of material. It's not. It's only a small portion of the front of that bevel cutting edge is actually engaging the wood, as you can see here. Now I'm being aggressive with it and I'm making a pretty deep cut. You can see it's like the left front of the nose is what's doing the removal here. Because this gouge is a little bit heavier than my 1/2 inch, it can remove more material quicker. But it's not a lot of material necessarily. It's just more than the 1/2 inch bowl gouge. Now I'm sticking with the 5/8 inch bowl gouge here because I need stability. This is actually one of the trickiest things. I have on the face of this blank, I have a high spot that's just barely higher than the low spot. So it's actually acting like a wedge or a ramp. So that can be tricky to get a good push cut across. So what I did here is I actually backed up a bit and I made the cut deeper so that I was under that high spot completely and just plowed it completely away. And that got me down to a level surface pretty quickly, which is what I'm looking for here. I just want to level this out. What I'm doing with the exterior of the bowl is I'm trying to make my point A and point B. Point A is going to be the tenon and the shoulder, and point B is going to be the rim. Once I know where the base of the bowl is and where the rim is, I basically then can shape and design what I want the bowl to look like. So I'm going to mark the size of my tenon. This is a 5-inch tenon that I'll be using. This is my largest chuck that I have. And then I'll remove material to expose that tenon, and then I'll also make a shoulder here. Again, with the 5/8 inch bowl gouge. Now, something that I'm doing throughout this turning that might not be obvious is I'm making sure that I'm utilizing the tools for their maximum ability while they're sharp. So if you see here, now I'm on the right side of that 5/8 inch bowl gouge. When I'm working the exterior of the bowl going from the base up to the rim, I'm using the left side of the gouge because I'm going from right to left. Here I'm going from left to right. And what that's doing is I'm getting pretty even wear on the cutting edge of this gouge. So when I go to sharpen it, whether I used the left side and the right side equally, I really need to sharpen it equally or symmetrically. So if for some reason I'm not using one side and I have to go back to the sharpening station, I'm basically cutting away steel that was already sharp on one side but wasn't used. So it's really nice to be able to use both sides of the cutting edge of the bowl gouge throughout your turning. And as I'm getting this blank more balanced, I'm able to bring the speed of the lathe up just a bit. It's pretty amazing when you just have one area that's more dense than another because there's a high spot or a rough spot or an uneven spot. It's incredible how much that can throw everything out of balance. Now I'm going to jump over to my 1/2" bowl gouge, and I'm going to clean up the sides of the shoulder, and I'm going to clean up the sides of the tenon. I'm not going to shape the tenon yet. Instead, I'd like to finish shaping the exterior of the bowl. And the reason I do that is if for some reason something would shift on the lathe, that way I get the tenon trued up at the very end. Now I'm going to sharpen my bowl gouge, and like I said, I kind of wore down both sides of this 5/8" bowl gouge, so I need to go back and sharpen it. Sharpening is super simple. I've got a course all about it, and quite honestly, I recommend it if you're just getting started out. Learn how to sharpen your tools first. Even if you don't know how to do anything at the lathe, if you have sharp tools, everything that you do learn at the lathe is going to be that much easier. So check out that course. And that's all you need to do. That was filmed in real time, so it's only a few seconds to sharpen up and get that edge back into condition where it can cut smoothly. And you can see how crisp those shavings are coming off with the sharp edge there, and how quickly I can get around that corner. The other big thing with turning is to pay attention to that performance. So right now when I came back to the lathe, I can tell that I have a really good cutting edge, and I can see it perform well. I'm not using a lot of pressure to make it cut, it's just cutting. I'm creating a path by shifting my body weight, and the tool's doing all the work. What I need to be paying attention to is the slowing down of that cut, or the sharp edge rather. I need to be paying attention to the gradual deterioration of that sharp edge. And as soon as I start realizing that it's deteriorating, I need to get back to the sharpening station and clean it up again. Now here again, I'm using both sides of that bowl gouge. If you saw the previous cut I just made was from right to left, and I was using the left edge pointing in the direction of the cut. Now I'm going from left to right, and I'm using the right side, or the right edge, which is sharp and clean still because I wasn't using it yet. And here you can see how small of an area the bowl gouge actually engages in. If you want to learn all about how to master the bowl gouge, I actually have a course on that, and it's a new course. It just came out. You're going to want to check it out. I've go through all of the details, everything you need to know to master the bowl gouge and get the best performance and learn how to make it disappear. If you're curious about what I mean, make the bowl gouge disappear, then go check it out. It's turnawoodbowl.com/master. So I have some low spots on this edge that I need to remove a little bit more material to level this out. Now the reason I'm doing this and cleaning up this edge is a couple factors. I want to make sure that I can see it well for the design, but I also want to get this blank balanced so I can speed the lathe up. Now I'm going to make a scraping cut up here at the rim of the bowl. Now the reason for this is, like I said, I want to establish the top portion of the bowl so that I can see where the shape is and how I'm going to be designing this bowl. So there are some high and low spots up here, and what I'm doing is I'm just using the scraping cut, which we go over that in our bowl gouge mastery course. But I'm using the scraping cut very carefully here to flatten off the top of this rim, and then I want to check this out. I do have some cracks here that I'm a little bit worried about. Typically with hickory, in my experience with hickory in the past, is those cracks don't open up much, but I really don't want to take a chance with it. So as much as it pains me, I'm going to remove some material to lower this rim a bit. This is something that's not easy to do when you first start turning. It's very common to think, well, I've got this great big blank. I want to make a bowl that's just as big as this blank. The reality is you need to really listen to the wood and understand it. If you see that the wood's got some issues, it's most of the time it's better just to work around those if you can, like I just did there. So this rim is not going to be as high, or this bowl won't be as deep as the entire blank, but I feel that the integrity of that rim will be better if we get those crack areas out of there. Now I'm showing you this camera angle so that you can see how I'm creating the curve of this bowl. I'm making the rim slightly closed, meaning that the rim diameter is less than the maximum or the widest diameter of this bowl. Now I'm using scraping cuts to shape this curve. You can see at the bottom there's kind of a hard corner, and obviously I've got that varying level right in the center. Those both need to be dealt with, and we'll get to those, but I'm going to use a scraping cut and then a shear scrape to take those curves down. The trick here is those adjustments are very subtle. If I were trying to do that with a push cut, there's a good chance that I'm going to create a new path that's going to need to be changed as well. So instead, I just want to connect and fix these points. I want to take that corner down, or that little curved edge down at the bottom. That one I can actually address with a push cut, but it needs to be very light. And then I'm going to blend this right in. If you see me lift my head there, I'm not looking at the tool right now. I'm looking at the top of the bowl, and I'm making sure that I'm following that same curve and the look. Now I'm going to go back to the scraping cut. The scraping cut is not a finishing cut. It's ripping out ingrained fibers. So I don't want to do that all the way down to the final surface, but it's okay for removing material right now. Now I can get the lathe up a little bit faster. Everything's pretty balanced. There's only some rough material at the very right side of this blank up near the faceplate that hasn't been addressed. Everything else is smoothed out and pretty even, so it's turning about as fast as I can get it to turn right now safely. Again, this blank has a lot of weight to it. You can see that edge at the base of this bowl slowly disappearing. Now I'm going to work on that overlapping space. I'm using the shear scrape here. Now the shear scrape is like the magic eraser of bowl turning. It is essentially shaving. I'm just shaving away very small amounts. I'm watching the top of this bowl and making sure that I've got the curve just where I want it. And I'm looking for high spots. I want to make sure that I'm just addressing those high spots and shaving this material down and getting the overall shape of the bowl. It's important to take your time and get the shape of the exterior exactly the way you want it. You don't want to rush this process. Here I'm using the shear scrape. You can see some of those grooved lines right there, and there's a division there where there are two different cut sections. I'm using this just to blend that whole area together and make it nice and smooth. Now this is my 5/8 inch bowl gouge. The reason I use this is I am extending over the tool rest quite a bit with this particular technique. And if you see the position of the tool rest, it needs to be perpendicular to the tool to support it. So this is a lot different tool rest position compared to most of the push cuts that you see. Now I'm going to shape the shoulder of this, which is actually going to become the foot of this bowl. Now that foot is, for my personal preference, it's pretty big, as in wide. And I like a narrower foot, but I want this bowl to be very practical so that it can be used and utilized on a regular basis. It can hold a lot of material, whatever is put inside this, whether it's fruit or something of weight. If something is on one side of the bowl and not the other, it shouldn't cause an issue. If I had a really small foot on here, the bowl could tip over. So that's functionality is the reason for the wider foot on this bowl. I'm also making this foot deeper, anticipating that it could warp as it dries. That way I can smooth it out and sand it. So I also want to curve the upper rim of this, and I think I'm going to do something a little different. Now I've just sharpened my tool, and I'm using a cut here that's against the supported grain direction. Now if I go slow and I have a very sharp tool, I will have a pretty decent finish underneath there. I just want to set this up to have this interesting beaded rim as opposed to a straight edge. I like the straight edge rims quite a bit, but I also like the idea of doing a beaded rim, and that's what we're going to try to do with this bowl. So I'm going to get this off the faceplate. Again, that impact driver is incredible. Although it's interesting because these screws have the square head on them, and that bit just wants to lock into those screws. It does not like letting go of them, but it also never slips, which is incredible. Okay, so I'm going to get this mounted to the chuck. You want to make sure there's no debris on that tenon. Anything that's in there, even one piece of shaving, is going to set the bowl off center just a hair, and it can make a difference. So I'm going to bring the tailstock up initially because I need to remove quite a bit of material on the top of this blank. I'm switching over to my 3/4 inch bowl gouge. This is a little heavier. Because I have the tool rest there, the tailstock, I can get a little more aggressive with this cut. So the 3/4 inch bowl gouge allows me to quickly plow out quite a bit more material than even the 5/8 inch. And because I'm pushing perpendicular or 90 degrees to the direction of the headstock, without the tailstock in this configuration for support, it would be a little bit dicey doing this. I would want to be making these cuts a lot less aggressive, slower, thinner cuts. It would take longer. Instead, because of that tailstock support, I can get in there and make a deeper pass and remove this material or the extra material much quicker. Now I know I'm going to get this question as well. It's like, why not core out other bowls in here? Well, there are times when coring works really well. Essentially, the coring system that I use is cutting out half spheres or hemispherical shapes, like half of a ball. And if you do something that's shallower, you're basically just making a smaller piece. Well, this bowl is wide and not super deep. So if I were to core this piece, I would probably only get a small, like 10-inch blank out of that. And the other reason that I'm not coring this out, which I know this won't be something that some people would like to hear, but I have a ton of this wood, literally probably multiple tons of this wood that I need to get through and turn. So creating more blanks is not a priority for me at this moment. I know that sounds wasteful, but it's just the honest truth. And like I said, by the time I got set up here, I would only be able to core out a shallow portion of this, which is not going to give me a very substantial bowl blank, which would yield a pretty small bowl. So instead, I'm going to focus on this bowl in this shape and not worry about the coring process. All right, now I've got the bulk of that material out of the way. I'm going to get the tailstock out of the way, and I'm going to start shaping the rim and the inside wall. As you guys know, this is how I like to work. Quite honestly, I can't imagine scooping out from the center and then getting all the way to the edge of this bowl and dealing with the flexing of the bowl. Now, I bumped the camera there, sorry guys. Basically, I'm looking through the camera to turn this because I want to show you guys the angle that I'm seeing. This is where you want to be. You want to be looking down on the piece so that you can see exactly where that exterior wall is. Now I'm removing material and I kind of create a ditch here. I like to look at it this way too. If you're clearing the interior, what's going to be the trickiest thing? And what's going to be the most difficult thing? The most difficult thing is getting that wall thickness right and matching the curve of the exterior. So the other thing that I like to do is do the most difficult thing first and just get it out of the way. The side benefit of this is, I'm using a scraping cut here to curve that rim. The side benefit of doing the most difficult thing first, which is to establish the rim and the inside wall thickness, I still have this mass of material in the center of the bowl, which is stabilizing the bowl. It's helping to prevent that rim from wobbling and flexing as I'm turning right now. If I were to core out the entire center and then now try to work this outer wall at the thinness that I'm planning, that bowl is going to be flexing a lot and it's going to be very difficult to manage. So I'm going to keep working down through the inside of this bowl and matching that wall thickness. Oh, I got a little kickback there. I got that kickback because I had my gouge opened. I've got it open there, but I'm just going to make a lighter cut and make sure that I don't repeat the same thing. We deal with that in the course as well, how to stop getting those kickbacks. There's a specific reason why it happens. So I'll remove more material here, and I basically just keep expanding this ditch. I like to call it a ditch. It's kind of this valley between the core of the inside and the exterior wall. I'll keep removing material and then bringing that wall thickness down to the level that I want it to be. And with this, I'm using my 1/2 inch bowl gouge. 1/2 inch bowl gouge is great for a general purpose bowl gouge. You can do an entire bowl with a 1/2 inch bowl gouge. The roughing portion of it is just going to take a little bit longer because it's not removing as much material, but you can do it. And it's really nice for doing finishing cuts like you're seeing here, getting this inside wall finished up. The other thing to be aware of when you're doing a closed rimmed bowl like this, and again, that's where the rim is just a little bit narrower than the widest part of the bowl, it will hold shavings. Even if it's a 1/4 inch narrower than the rest of the bowl, it's going to hold shavings. And it's a good idea to stop occasionally and get those shavings out of the side wall there because they can interfere with your cuts. Here again is another example of maximizing the sharp edge of the bowl gouge. I'm using the left side of the gouge here for clearing out and lowering the center mass, where when I do cuts from the rim down, I'm using the right side. This also keeps this is my 5/8 inch bowl gouge, and because I'm using that for clearing this material, it keeps my 1/2 inch bowl gouge sharp, or at least it's not getting dulled down by doing this roughing work. So when I return back to that edge, I'll switch back to my 1/2 inch bowl gouge, which is sharper than this one is now at the moment because I've done so much cutting with the 5/8 inch bowl gouge. So I will then, it makes it easier. I can return to the sharpening station, sharpen them both up and start again, and try to use that cutting edge as evenly as possible to maximize the amount of tool that gets shaved down from the sharpening process. That being said, I've had these gouges for a very long time. It's incredible how little material is removed when you sharpen with a CBN wheel. The CBN versus the old school aluminum oxide wheels is just unbelievable. The oxide wheels just grind material away. You can see the material disappear, and it's incredible. The CBN wheels barely remove any material. It's not even noticeable. Now these are roughing cuts. You can see how I'm being a little bit more aggressive with the tool, and I'm getting these big thick shavings coming out. That's one of the ways you know it's a roughing cut. And here I can switch that tool direction, and I can get this surface down close to the level that I need before I come back in with the 1/2 inch bowl gouge. Now I have the flute relatively open. That's about the only time that you want to do that is when you're making a pass that is very light in a very small area. You know you're not going to hit any rough material that's going to cause a catch. You don't want to have the flute open if you're going to be doing any roughing, because you're going to get a nasty catch. Okay, I've switched over to my sharp 1/2-inch bowl gouge, and I'm just blending all of these cut lines together to have a nice curved section here. Now, the other big takeaway with this is you do not have to pretend to be a wood turning magician and make a pass from the rim all the way to the base of the bowl. Instead, it's totally fine to work in sections like you're seeing here, and you will have just as nice of a bowl, if not better, because you're going to have this very controlled wall thickness that's been established. Here I'm switching back to the 5/8-inch gouge to clear out more of that mass in the center. And there is kind of that misconception that you have to make these really long cuts in order to make a beautiful bowl. And that comes from watching turners that have done it for years make those effortless passes along a bowl, both the outside and the inside. And that's fine to do, and there's times when you can do that. It actually works really well on very green wood that is soaking wet. This is not wet enough to do that. This is it still has moisture, but it's not wet enough to be doing big wide cuts like that. And typically you're not going to do big wide cuts on a large piece like this because you're going to have that instability on the outside rim. That outside rim, unsupported, flexes a lot. And that's part of the reason why, well, that is one of the main reasons that I like doing the cuts the way I'm doing them. I work from the rim down, establish the wall thickness, and keep moving down through the bowl, matching that wall thickness. But I don't return to that rim. And the reason is that with this center mass being gone, that rim is flexing, and I can't get a good clean cut. If you even did start cutting it, what's going to happen is two sides of the inside of the bowl are going to be hitting the bowl gouge and being cut, while at this exact same time, the opposite two sides are going to flex away from the tool and not be cut. So you're going to get this really weird pattern, and that's a best case scenario. In many cases, just introducing the bowl gouge up to a thin rim like that will make the bowl completely disintegrate and shatter and go flying off the lathe. And that is one of the ways that a lot of people do this. They get a bowl almost complete and hollowed out, and then they go back to the rim. Here I'm measuring and checking the wall thickness. This is a plunger gauge. You can see my right hand there. I'm looking at the gap in the very top of that, which was over by my right hand. And that's giving me an indication of how thick that wall is. I'll put a link to that and all the tools that I use in the description below this video. Also, you can go over to my website at turnawoodbowl.com. I have at the top menu, I have a recommended equipment. There I have everything neatly organized. You can see all the tools that I use and recommend, and there's links there so you can check that out. So at this point, you want to stop and check frequently. Down in the bottom of that curve in this particular bowl, which is wide and kind of has more of a flat bottom than most of the bowls I turn, it's impossible to get your hands around there and pinch it to feel it. You can kind of tell by touching one side or the other, but there's no way to know unless you can get a gauge or a caliper on there to actually take a look at that. I'm making very light cuts here, just blending in those shapes. I'm going to continue taking that center mass down. Now there's another thing that I've done with this bowl that you might notice. The grain pattern in this bowl is, or should be, pretty spectacular. And there's a particular way you can do that. If you think about taking a log and splitting it in half and then using each half as a bowl, well, it's very easy to take that flat inside cut portion and simply decide, well, that'll be the top rim of the bowl. If you have a species of tree that has an interesting heart pattern, like this hickory does, it has a dark heart area and a lighter sapwood. And if you just used that flat section as your rim, what's going to happen is you're going to have a bowl that's going to be basically sapwood, and then on two sides you're going to see a half circle where the heartwood was, and that's it. And it'll be sapwood through the bottom of the bowl. To make the bowl a lot more interesting and to really feature that heartwood, you cut out your round bull blank cylinder and then flip it. So the inside flat portion of that split log, hopefully this makes sense visually, but if you took a log, split it in half so you have two half cylinders, that flat section is actually the bottom of this bowl. Instead of making it the top rim portion, I flipped the blank over and made that the bottom of this bowl. Hopefully that makes sense. And by doing that, what you're doing is we're looking down in through the wood. So we have less sapwood. That's kind of on the sides, two walls of the bowl. But we can see this beautiful heartwood all the way down into the bottom interior of the bowl. It's one of those simple things that after you do 40 or 50 bowls, you think, oh, wait a minute, I see how this pattern could be more interesting. And then you flip it over. And it is a lot more interesting. You can see those shavings building up in the side walls. I'm working the center here, so it's not a huge issue. So I'm just going to let those build up, and I'll take them out once I'm done with this section that I'm working. Again, this is the 5/8 inch bowl gouge I'm using to rough out this material. You can see a little bit of flexing on that rim. If you look over to the left side of the screen right there, you can see it's moving around a little bit already. That's when you don't want to bring the tool back up to it, because it's not going to give you a clean cut. All right, now that the bowl is weighing a lot less and the shavings are building up on the floor, I can turn the lathe speed up, and I can also increase the braking mechanism so that the blank will stop a lot quicker now. My lathe has the ability to change the braking speed, and it's down to about 2.5 seconds, or the setting is 2.5. I want to think that it's close to about 2.5 seconds. When I have the blank on initially, when it's heavy, it can take between 18 to 20 some seconds for the lathe to properly stop the piece. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to my micro bevel. Now, I don't use this tool a lot, but when I do, it works perfectly. This inside corner was a little bit tricky. I was getting catches here, but because I couldn't get my 55-degree bevel quite in there without grabbing that edge and causing a catch. So I'm using my micro bevel bowl gouge. I've got a video all about the micro bevel that you're going to want to check out. I'm checking those wall thicknesses and make sure I've got the material thickness there that I need. And I'll continue taking this down. If you're not already subscribing to my channel, please consider subscribing. And if you've liked this video at all, or if you've learned anything from it, do me a huge favor and click that like button. I know you hear me say it a lot, and it sounds kind of annoying when you hear people say it, but the algorithms see people clicking the like button and subscribing and leaving comments, and that helps the video and helps the channel. And by doing that, you help me a lot. So if you could, just click that like button. I greatly appreciate you doing that. Thank you. So I'm still, it's hard to see here, but I'm still just working sections. I got that last section leveled off to the way I liked, and I'm going to start working the center section. I still have about a 1/2 inch of material that needs to be removed in the center bottom of this bowl. There you can see the angle that the micro bevel bowl gouge is presented at. It's almost straight in. It's an incredible tool for taking care of situations that are a little tricky in a deeper bowl. You can also see how big the bowl is in this particular shot. This is a large bowl. 15 inches is quite large, and it's not a common size, and it's a very unique bowl that has a lot of potential to be an heirloom that gets passed down and through the family, which makes turning something like this so cool. So I'm backing up, I'm going back a bit to blend in all of those previous areas to make sure everything is nice and smooth. Now, even though this bowl is relatively wide and is somewhat flat in the bottom, we almost never want the center bottom of the bowl to be truly flat. Instead, we want it to be concave so that it curves down and there's the continuous flow of that curve that you created with the sidewalls. So I was stopping in the center there because I was focused on blending in those sides. And now, because I'm away from those sidewalls, I can get in here pretty easily with my 55-degree bevel. So I'm going to use my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel bowl gouge, which I just sharpened, because you really want to make sure that your tool is nice and sharp for these last final finishing passes. That way you get a good clean cut, and you have to do very little sanding when you have this really sharp edge. And you want to be careful with that center. Remember to slow down and let the tool cut. That's the slowest rotating portion of the bowl. Back up one more time to blend all those areas together. You can see how much I've slowed down here to make sure this is really nice, clean pass right through the center. All right, that's looking really good. And look at that heartwood in there. Oh my gosh, that's going to be gorgeous. I can't wait to put some finish on that. So I'm going to sand this up. I'm liking the beaded edge too. I don't do a lot of those, but that's actually turned out pretty nice. I like it. Take a little bit of time and refine it. I used a lot of shearing, I used a lot of real light scraping cuts to shape the curve of that beaded edge. Now with the lathe off, I want to take my time and remove any kind of tool marks. You want to sand those out initially with your most coarse grit. Here I'm using 120, and I'll move up to 180, 220, and then 320. All right, so I'm going to apply tried and true original finish. This is linseed oil and beeswax, and that's it. There's no other ingredients and there's no other chemicals. That's why I use this product. I'm not sponsored by them, but it's just a great product to use for food safe applications like this bowl. Because there's only linseed oil and beeswax, it is 100% food safe. The way this gets applied is we put a thin coat on. Essentially, if you can see it on the wood, you have enough on. And I'm going to wait an hour and wipe off any excess. And then I wait 24 hours and I will burnish that in with steel wool. And we'll see that in just a minute. We got this really pretty edge there. There's like a knot or something going on inside the log that turned out really nice. It's very cool. There's a slight reddish hue to the heartwood of this hickory that's absolutely gorgeous. So I've got this little piece of cloth. That's actually just an old part of a t-shirt. And I dip that in there and I squeegee off some. And it's plenty to finish quite a large area. You can see how much I'm working this. And it covers quite a bit of area before I have to add a little bit more finish to the applicator. Now something that's really important, because this is linseed oil based, is you want to take any rags that you're using with this and get them outside. You want to soak them in water and keep them outside. All right, so I'm going to let this set up for 24 hours. And then I'm going to come back and we're going to burnish this with 4/0 steel wool. Now the steel wool is going to take down any high spots. It's also going to burnish and buff out this wax finish that's on here. It's all it takes. Bring the lathe speed up and you see it'll build up a little bit on the steel wool. You can stretch it out and flip the steel wool over and use a different area. I have not had any issues with there being any steel left in the finish. I get that question occasionally. If you were to apply a water-based finish over this, which is not recommended because you're applying wax here, then potentially that water-based finish, if there was some little dinky fleck somewhere, it could rust, but this finish is on so thin, it's not going to hold steel up against the wood surface. So you basically burnish this out. Look at that luster. It's got a really nice clean. It's not super glossy, but it's not dull either. It's just very, very nice. Now I'm going to reverse this bowl on a jam chuck and remove the tenon and establish the foot of this bowl. I have a simple jam chuck that I created and I've spray mounted a foam pad on it. With a larger piece like this, it's a little tricky getting that foam pad mounted in there and balanced. So it's nice to just spray mount that on there so that it stays in a nice balanced position. Now see that little spot? That's where we had the tailstock up in the beginning. We just need to match that up and everything is trued up right away. It's another advantage of using the tailstock at the beginning of your turning. So I'm making push cuts towards the headstock there to remove that material. I'm going to go true up the base of this foot. Make sure that's nice and level. And then I'm going to start pushing inward and scooping out the center of the foot. I definitely don't want the base of this bowl to be perfectly flat. That's just doesn't look good. Instead, what I want is I want the foot of the bowl to have a rim and a lower recessed concave area around that rim of the foot. You want to take your time here. There's no reason to get aggressive. Keep in mind that at this point, the only thing holding this bowl on the lathe is this tailstock and the pressure from the tailstock. It's pushing up against the jam chuck. And this is a pretty good sized bowl, so I want to make sure that I'm making nice clean cuts here. We don't need any catches, don't need any excitement at this point. And I'm going to continue scooping out the interior of the foot. There's a rough spot here that won't let me start. I'm going to take a look at that. Yeah, there's a shift in grain direction there. It could be a branch or something. There's a shift in grain direction, which is giving me a little bit of a hiccup there. So I need to be a little more intentional with this push. Make sure that I've got the cut established and then push it in. You want to be careful starting and stopping the lathe at this point too, especially once that little nub becomes narrow. Just the torque of the lathe stopping and starting could cause that little nub to break. So at this point, I really don't want to be stopping the lathe again until I'm ready to sever the end of that nub. You can see how the bite that I'm taking, the width of the cut is becoming narrower there. And before I get too much farther down here with that nub, I want to remove some more material to shape that inside bottom of the foot. You don't want to wait until you're down to almost nothing connecting there because you're not going to have the support potentially. Now, if you're not comfortable doing this, you could stop at this point and you can sand that down. You can cut it off with a small handsaw and then sand it down. That's not a problem. What I like to do is I like to nibble it down as small as possible, then switch over to my spindle detail gouge and then sever that nub off right when I turn the lathe off. All right, so we're going to switch over to the spindle detail gouge. This has a little bit more pointed nose that can get down into that corner better than the 1/2 inch bowl gouge. So I'm going to make sure that that surface area is level, matching the curve that I created. Clean this up. Don't want to get too small here, but because it's going to separate pretty easily. And now I'm going to do a forward pressure cut and turn the lathe off while applying pressure, and that will sever that little nub off. Okay, so now that we've got that taken care of, that base of this, or the foot of this, will need to be sanded up. So just take a little bit of time. Remember, just using the edge of the sander, I'm going to clean up the center of this. Now, I've got a video all about sanding bowls, and sanding does not have to be that complicated. You might want to check that out. I'll put a link to that video. So I'm going to sand this out and smooth it off, then we'll finish this bowl off. I like to use my wood burning tool to sign, and I use a chisel point, which is not the traditional signing tip. They do make pin tips that are rounded, kind of like a ballpoint pin. I don't really care for the line so much. My signature has a lot of lines in it, and I like the crispness that the chisel point makes. And it is a little trickier because I have to maneuver the tool around quite a bit when I'm signing, but I like the overall look. And then I'll apply a little finish to that area. Now I'll have to come back and clean up that area as well, just like I did with the rest of the bowl, but that's pretty much it. This bowl is complete. The other nice thing about using this finish is you don't have to worry about blending the areas. That previous area and the area I have here will match perfectly. Wow, there it is. Look at that. Look at the heartwood and the grain pattern. This is what I was mentioning about exposing that heartwood. Had I just simply flipped the blank over, it would not look like this. That heartwood would only be up on the sides, and there would be nothing like this in the middle. So just by flipping that over, you get this beautiful look. Wow, I love this bowl. Super happy with that beaded rim too. Very, very fun. This could be used at a party tonight for a whole bunch of people, whether you serve a salad in it or if you have fruits or vegetables or things like that that could be prepared and displayed in this. This could be used after you've harvested something from your garden and you want to just have it sitting in the kitchen for a while. What's so cool about this, you can use this today, and hopefully this same bowl will be used decades from now, because why wouldn't it be? Something of this nature where you take a piece of tree that was salvaged from a storm and turn it into this, to me, it's priceless. I never get tired of this for some reason. I just love making bowls like this. It's just so cool. I think this will be around for a long time. No matter where it goes, it's going to be well received, and it's something that you just pass down, and you know it's going to be around for a long time. That's what I love about this. Now, this is hickory. This is rather large. It's almost 15 inches in diameter, and I think it turned out pretty well. There are some things that I probably would do a little differently with it, but all in all, I'm very happy with it. I like this little simple beaded edge here. I don't do that a lot, and I like the way that turned out. And this grain in here is phenomenal. There's part of a branch or a knot in here, so there's extra interesting portion right here, but this coloration through here with the sapwood is absolutely gorgeous. So I hope you guys liked watching this video as much as I like making this bowl. So if you did, do me a huge favor and click that like button below the screen. I greatly appreciate that. It helps this video, and I appreciate you doing that. Thank you. All right, guys, be sure to check out my website, turnwoodbowl.com. Over there, I have everything you need to know, including courses that will help you learn how to sharpen your tools, learn how to master the bowl gouge, learn how to turn bowls, and how to process raw wood such as this hickory and turn it into something as beautiful as this. So check out my courses over at turnawoodbowl.com. If you look up at the top menu, you see courses, click on that. You're not going to want to miss them. It's going to accelerate your learning process and help you advance to getting to this point much quicker. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. And as always, until next time, happy turning.